there is going to be communication, whether it's, you know, what the kind of communication as far as cars or trucks or whatever, it doesn't really matter. So what you're saying though is that somehow those two are going to be linked with a transportation link, whether they have to go on the city streets to get from one point to the other.
Correct. We're not saying, for example, well, number one, we've got all kinds of qualifications. The dotted lines, for example, particularly are alternatives to the solid lines. Or are, for example, if this is to be determined to be overloaded, or if it is determined that we want to promote a better land use in this area, this has the potential to be added onto the network. It might not be in the first flush of the network. Secondly, we have not, again, determined what technology these lines will be. This will be part of this whole alternative combinations. Our next task from this point on here now is to, number one, assess available technologies. Second, to apply alternative technologies to these particular links, to look at these links and say, what is the advantage of using a guideway here? What is the advantage of using a bus here? What is the advantage of pulling a horizontal pedway here? What is the advantage of using a monorail or gondolas or whatever the hell in terms of what these links might be? That's our next phase of that. Right.
Are you working at all with any of the city councilmen or closely with them or any of the decision-making vote people?
Okay, for the most part, the study and review group is made up of all interested participants from city, county, SCI-Arc, and so forth. We have been getting, you might call them low-level representation or field people. Same way at a city planning department. Cal Hamilton is not there, but someone farther on down the transportation section is there. It's a whole process that we hope all of these lower level representatives are taking back to the higher level to keep them informed. There will be a couple of points of major review. The main point will be when we get down from the 12 alternatives down to the 3 candidates that will be looking at detail. There will be a major review of that. But meanwhile, meshing very closely with SCRTD, and because number one, their application to UMTA, which is a grant application, is going in with this system as a single package, because if they don't have, the feds are interested, if you bring all these people into the region and you don't have a way of distributing them to their employment, you have only a half a system. So what are you doing in the central business district? So this will be a part of the federal grant, whatever we have, related to what they're coming in with, and they're developing 9 alternatives. Our 3 alternatives have to be responsive to their 9 alternatives as well.
What about, besides CDC and body of planners, what about other community groups? Are they having any input into what's happening?
Definitely. When this framework came out, one of the first things that we pointed out was that number one, we were impacting, and I should move that over because it should be closer to the freeway. I guess that's a little better. Number one, we were impacting the Westlake community up in there with both a bus and a parking intercept. That particular square and circle does not represent, at this particular point in time, a precise location. There are a number of locations up in that area, some closer to the freeway than others, that we will be looking at in terms of being able to accommodate both buses and cars. But we are impacting the Westlake community not only with an intercept, but with a potential of a link from that intercept into the CBD going through a community. We also have the option from that particular point of coming down the freeway right-of-way, which Caltrans has been doing some work for us related to taking guideways or transportation systems down the medians of the freeways. But there is that potential. So, and there's also the potential we've identified of impacting the Pico Union area. We've asked barrio planners and the CDCs now to identify the concerned community groups to start a potential planning process in those community groups, to identify, not to go into the community and say, we're coming in with this mother and we're going to really lay it on you, so what do you think about it? But rather to go into the community and say, if a transportation element is put into your community, there would be some trade-offs related to having this element in your community. Number one, you will be getting some advantage out of being able to have access to the CBD. Now, that might not be terribly important to most of the people in the community, that their community needs are far greater than having access to the CBD. What are the needs in your community in terms of recreation, housing, etc.? And that potential redevelopment areas of 4 or 5 or 6 square blocks could be set up to offset whatever impact the transportation system might be in terms of meeting the needs of the community. Again, this would be a participatory, hopefully it will be a participatory planning process with the community and ourselves through barrio planners. Yeah.
You were talking earlier about the RTD going down Los Angeles River, whatever it is, and how that the argument that you gave was that that they didn't want to use it, but the argument you gave was that that it would create new land use. How does what you establish now, is that based on existing land use or proposed land use, or is it kind of in between?
Well, this framework doesn't represent in itself and through here, realizing that this framework corridors could be yay wide, doesn't represent a compatibility necessarily with or without land use. This would be, this compatibility in terms of proposed development would be developed at a finer grain than what's presently shown. So we've used it only in terms of initial locations or potential locations for these intercepts and determine the compatibility or non-compatibility of some of the intercepts. The ones that are shown are, for the most part, we feel could be compatible. Some of the ones that we're not looking at here now, but some of the freeway bus ones, for example, that were shown up in the area of Chavez Ravine and around Dodger Stadium in new multi-family residential areas, we determined as being incompatible with the land use up in there, and that was one of the reasons they were eliminated.
Depending on what comes first as far as these intercepts, could or if like the existing land development came about first and the intercepts were part of the plan that came in, then it would work one way. But if you started to put in your intercepts first, then it would create possibly a different plan.
Agreed. The ideal that planners have worked toward is to establish your goals and objectives as how you want to shape your city. Do your general plans in conformance with your goals and objectives as how you want to concentrate, how you want to develop land use. Then use transportation as an implementation tool to realize your planning. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked out that way because there are no tools or no mechanisms for implementation of land planning. It's an abstraction. It's drawn on a map, it goes in a drawer. City planning commissions sometimes do or don't make decisions based on those general plans. Transportation, though, is, if it is implemented, it does form the base. We're doing this backwards here now because that's the way it generally works. And we haven't found a mechanism to make it work the other way. Just as the freeways determined land use along their corridors, rather than the reverse way, there wasn't sufficient. So a transportation system such as this establishes the potential for land use. At every station location that you locate, you in a sense are creating the potential for a higher density of development, both in possibly residential and in commercial. The intent of this study would be to take advantage of the areas that would, in terms of the environment and in terms of desirable land use, those stations would be located in those areas that would be determined in the planning process as being the better locations for that. We will also be looking into the possibility of helping to pay for the system by the increased land value of the areas around the stations and the property owners being subsidized, being taxed, so to speak, because of that increased value that would go into the system. Did I answer your question?
What are you feeling about the Baxter Ward's proposal about using a rail system, which he says can be implemented tomorrow with Pasadena Union Station and El Monte Union Station, the San Fernando Valley Union Station, Long Beach Union Station, using rail train systems as a starter?
Well, generally I'm simpatico to the idea of using existing right-of-ways, minimum capital expenditures in order to get as large a regional system as possible. There are problems to be overcome, as for instance, when I talked to the modeling cats over in Skag, and they sort of hooed at Baxter Ward's scheme, the problem, particularly out in the valley, is grade separations. You've got heavy north-south automobile traffic. This is all assuming, of course, that, if you could get people out of their cars and onto transportation systems, it wouldn't create these kinds of problems. But if you've got people driving in cars and you're crossing, in a sense, you've got a conflict between the rail system and the automobile at the same grade. They were estimating these gates, these safety gates, was going up and down like this every time one of these cars went by, which were going by at about 20 to 40 second headways. So it isn't all quite as simplistic, as what a politician would make it appear. Yeah.
Besides that tax increase you were talking about, what other finance frameworks are you considering as you're doing these physical plans, these general trade? There's got to be some way to pay.
Okay. As part of the process of what I originally talked about with the study design, we outlined 76 various tasks related to pulling this thing together. The Economist has about 4 or 5 tasks related to funding, and it includes the kind of potential funding I described before, what they call local funding, city, county participation in tax, either in tax assessment districts or a whole varied bag to be looked at. In terms of sales tax, what they call non-local funding, what they call private funding, and what they call federal funding. So he has like 4 or 5 tasks related to the potential of funding the system. Then along with that will be both capital and operating costs of this system here, and then the whole thing will be put into a financing package and broken down into a phased development of implementation and so forth. Hopefully when we get through with this study in May, there'll be all sufficient information related to almost any aspect as to be able to have someone make a decision other than just a political decision, that it would have a rationale all behind the whole thing. Yeah.
As far as utilizing rail rights of way, I understood that SP was not willing or not in favor of the idea of sharing their rights of way. Is that still the case now?
I really don't know. I think they do have some problems with sharing the rails where they're using for freight. The railroads are not interested, as you know, in passengers anymore, and that's why Amtrak came all about. The railroads are interested in fact, terribly concerned about all of their freight lines. So if it was an interference with their freight line, yeah, then they would be very guarded in their giving up those rights. Anybody else? If not, I guess that's our presentation for this morning, and hopefully in May I'll come back and give you the where we finally got to, if we get there. Thank you.